versus married folks. Married folks are going to use a very traditional line of transferring their wealth from their parents, from themselves to their children.
Right.
The Love Jones Cohort, which we even talk about in the book, can transfer their wealth to niece, nephews, godchildren, goddaughters, godsons, right, to friends, children, to social organizations and institutions. In fact, the women in the cohort were willing to give some of their assets to organizations that they belong to, like their church or their sorority. The men did not say that, but the women did. So I thought that was an interesting gender difference as well. But what it does tell me is that there's innovative ways that the Love Jones cohort or single folks can transfer their wealth. And unfortunately, parents are stuck in just transferring theirs to their children, which is so just like... I don't want to use the word boring, but it's very direct and straightforward. Yeah. Single folks have a plethora of ways they can build the next generation, the next community.
Right.
Similar to that conversation, though, which I think is really necessary, is that I talk to everybody in the book, but I'm particularly talking to people that are single and living alone. And I'm talking about how they need to develop a will and or living trust, especially because if you don't have a partner, you don't have children, you want to make sure you know exactly where your assets are going to go, especially if something happens to you. And I appreciate having that conversation in the book. And at least 4 or 5 of my friends or people who have read the book have said, thank you, Kris, or thank you, Dr. Marsh. I put a living trust and will together after having read your book. I did not have one together yet. So I appreciate the book because it's giving people practical knowledge, and they're actually putting some of the information that they've learned in the book into actual practice.
That's good. Absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, this book was really like a super learning experience for me. I think I'm going to get a couple copies and send them out as Christmas gifts to some of my single friends, though. Absolutely. Seriously. I'm telling you, so, but let me ask this. Do you yourself see Black middle class as a norm?
As the norm?
Yeah. I know it talked about in the book how, so in the book, I know that I was reading a section where it was talking about how Black middle class was new to some people, but, for instance, myself, I guess I'm a second generation middle class Black person, but I didn't really feel like that. I grew up, my dad worked at Ford, as you talked about before, you probably didn't even know that, but we actually lived a middle class lifestyle, but at the time I didn't really realize it. My dad lived really frugal and things like that. But, we did own the house that we lived in. We lived there for 20 years, my dad's retired and, he does fine for himself. So, I would consider myself second generation middle class. But in the book, it was talking about how a lot of people that are second generation middle class see Black middle class as the norm. Do you see Black middle class as a norm, you yourself?
So I myself, yes. And also the literature, I think, kind of helps me to contextualize the question or my answer. So I think what's really important and what we have to think about is that Black America, I want to talk about Black America. I actually did some work in South Africa and I'm having a conversation globally. But if we're talking about Black Americans and Black America is not a monolith. There is variation within Black America. You don't have to equate struggle with Blackness. There are some Black folks, in spite of everything that's going on in this U.S. context, that are doing well. And so if we automatically default to Black being poor, then that's highly problematic for me. Okay. I think it's important for us to think about how when you say Black, you have to qualify or just describe which Black America you're talking about, because there is a Black middle class in America and we need to talk about it. So I think that we should normalize Black being there being so much variation within Black America. And part of that variation is a thriving Black middle class. Now, with that being said, one of the things I do try to talk about in the book is I try to talk about structural forces and how structural forces, when I say structural forces, I'm thinking about like racism and like gendered racism. I'm thinking about how those like residential segregation, wealth disparities, mass incarceration, how all of that plays into our personal choices.
Right.
And so one of the things that's really important for me is when we talk about singlehood is that we don't just make it an individual conversation like, oh, woe is me, Kris Marsh is single, something must be wrong with Kris. She hates Black men or this, that, and the other. There is an entire structure that we have to navigate through. We don't live in a vacuum. And so the conversation about singlehood is often left at the individual level. But I'm saying let's include structure into the conversation. And if we do, then we have to admit that structural forces constrain personal choices. Put differently, racism constrains our personal choices. To give you an example so you can wrap your mind around it, if I, Kris Marsh, want to marry another heterosexual Black male with a PhD who makes $150,000 a year, owns his own home, and has estate planning, they're simply not there. That's structural.
Right.
And we need to have that part of the conversation. And we don't always have that part of the conversation.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think that's, if you ask me myself, I think that's probably what's kind of hurting. I mean, in particular Black, and I'm only talking about Black heterosexual couples, but I think the fact that, how roles were in the past where you would have men as the provider and, women were kind of submissive, whereas roles have changed now and where women make more money, men make less money. I think sometimes in some situations, I think that sometimes that's a problem. I think that there's some men that don't want to make less money than their women. And I think there's some women that don't want men that make less money than them. But like you say, when you're an accomplished woman who makes $200,000 a year, I mean, the chances of you finding somebody who's just as accomplished as yourself that's not already married or just not marriage material, that it's slim to none. You know what I mean? At least from what I hear from women that I talk to that are accomplished, though.
Right.
Yeah. I feel like it's harder for them. I feel like the guys that I talk to that make lots of money, they don't have a problem with, maybe dating or marrying a woman that they will bring up to middle class status, though. But I think women are out here trying to make sure that they don't get with somebody who takes them away from being middle class status. Right.
And I think that that's really an important conversation because two things. One, when Black women can't marry down. So when I say marry someone maybe of a lower class status than them.
Right.
People think that there's a problem with that. There aren't a lot of people on their same status or higher status. So what are they supposed to do? But a Black man, I would argue, has way more versatility. He can marry up, he can marry down, he can interracially marry, which is a whole other conversation I talk about in the book. But people don't look at them a certain kind of way.
Right.
And so we need to have a conversation around that. But I think this leads into my second point. It's like, why are we constantly policing Black women? Let Black women do whatever they want to do. If they want to marry up, down, or sideways, let them do what they want to do. Stop policing Black women. You tell us how loud we can be. You tell us how loud we can't be. You tell us how our hair can be natural, how our hair can't be natural. You tell us how big our butt can be, how big our butts can't be. And now you're going to tell us who we can and cannot date. Stop policing Black women would be the argument that I push back on.
I agree 100%. I think that that's part of the reason that me and Monique's marriage is so successful, because I let her be her. She makes more money than I do. Not a whole lot more, but she definitely does make more money than I do. She's more accomplished in her career than I am. You know what I mean? And that's not to shortchange me at all, though. And I revel in that. And I try to support her in that. And I want her to be her. You know what I mean? Now, let me say this. I don't win that many arguments, but,
right.
That's my woman, though. You know what I mean? She's smart. She's intelligent. And I really, I believe in her choices as well, too. And I think that's a lot of it also, though, too. I revel in who she is. You know what I mean? So, so I ride with that, and I don't think a lot of men, I think for a lot of men, sometimes they feel like it's a shot to their, character or whatever, though, to maybe be that supportive and stuff. And I think it takes a lot, but I mean, I don't know,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear you and I absolutely appreciate you. But I'm sure there's people that are out there like, well, you got to make sure you put her in check, man. Man, miss me on that entire conversation.
I know. I mean, but we put it right. But we put each other in check. And I mean, that's part of marriage, too. You got to be checkable as well. You need at least one or two people in your life that can tell you about yourself.
Right.
What's the whole point if you don't? You know what I mean?
Right.
So, like I said, marriage is not for the meek. So, I mean, I hope that a lot of single people, begin to embrace their singleness. I know some that really do. They revel in the fact, no, I'm good. I don't need kids. I don't need a man. I don't need I see more women saying they don't need a man. I think a lot of men, they might say that they don't need women, but I think a lot of men, they kind of want like a woman or some type of,
well, but I think that's also aligning with is with the data, and the literature suggests that marriage tends to be more beneficial for men than it is for women. And so because marriage has more benefits for men, and I'm not even talking like economic or anything like that. I'm actually thinking about like health wise and well-being, because you have a wife that's helping to take care of you. You tend to have more benefits in marriage.
Right.
But for women are like, yeah, I need a wife of my own to help me with like the day-to-day managing of my life.
Right.
And so for that reason, that's why women are like, I could take it. Some women are like, that's why I can take it or leave it. And men are like, oh no, I got to be married. Yeah, you do. Because you need somebody to hold your whole life together.
Right, exactly. Plus you want to have kids and you want somebody to babysit them kids and do all the running and stuff. But that type of stuff, me and Monique, we split in half. You know what I mean? I see a lot of people who are married too as well. They try to split those duties. I know when I grew up, it was like I said, there were roles. My mom worked, my dad worked too, but my mom did all the cooking. She did all the things around the house that, you know what I mean? And she just did those things. My grandmother did the same thing. Me and Monique, it's different. I'll cook dinner, you know what I mean, and get everything ready at the house with the kids so she can just come in on days, and then some days she does it as well. It's a trade-off. And I also think that that's something that a lot of people don't think about as well too, that are single, is like you said, the load of having a spouse and kids, because you have to. Those are other people that you have to care about all the time. You know what I mean, though?
Right.
And that's probably why they live longer, because they get more naps. They get to save more of their money. They don't have to, deal with, other people's issues. And, not that it's a burden to people that are married or, have kids, because it's a life that they chose. But nevertheless, it's a weight that you carry every day.
Right. Absolutely.
So single people, don't be sad about being single. It's okay.
I know.
It's just as good a situation as being married. Being happy is really the whole goal to all of this.
Combo Cafe.
Listen to the Combo Cafe on all major platforms: iHeart, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at It's the Combo Cafe. We appreciate the support in advance. Life is crazy as hell, and we gonna talk about it. You got something to say? DM us on Instagram and say it. Combo Cafe.
One of the things that I talk about in the book is having interviewed 62 people that are single and living alone, who could be in relationships. They're just not living with their romantic partner.
Right.
Is that so overall, they were very happy with their lifestyles, and they were very happy with the life that they were leading. And friends played a central role in that level of happiness. Now, I want to be fair and I want to be balanced in what the respondents said in the book. People did talk about loneliness and sometimes maybe like mild depression. But what they talked about it like in very situational kind of ways. They talked about loneliness in particular. Right. So they said, overall, I'm really happy with my life. There's certain times out of the year where I might be a little bit lonely. Maybe around Valentine's Day, or maybe around like New Year's Eve when everybody has somebody to kiss. But they talked about how it was situational. It wasn't a chronic loneliness whereby they couldn't get out of bed. They pulled the covers up over their head and they stayed in the bed for weeks on end. No.
Right.
They said they'd be lonely on Valentine's Day or something like that. They would spend time with their friends. Their friends would help them navigate it. The next day they'd be up, they'd be ready to rock and roll, and everything would be fine. Right. So there might be times where you have little bouts of situational loneliness, but that's where I think we have to dig in deep and think about how we think about relationships and how we have to boundarize those non-romantic nurturing relationships. Why do you have to send chocolate or flowers to the romantic person in your life? Why can't you send chocolate and flowers to the non-romantic persons or people in your life? Right. And I think that that's the way we need to really start thinking about these holidays. It's like, it's not just for the romantic person. It's for people that you love, but it doesn't have to be a romantic kind of love. So I just want to make sure that I am balanced in what I say and as I talk about the respondents in the book.
Agreed. So then let me ask this as well, too, because I really didn't read anything in the book about this. I mean, out of all the people in the cohort, were any of them a part of the LGBTQ plus community?
Yes, there was one guy who was Peter, I believe his name was, who was part of the LGBTQIA plus community. And
Okay.
one of the things that Peter talked about, he was happy in his singleness. He was dating people in other racial and ethnic groups. But one of the things he said, he's like, if I do decide that I'm going to get married or partner, I definitely want to marry somebody who's also Black, because there's certain things I just don't want to have to explain to the partner. And the women in the cohort talked about that as well.
Right. Yeah. I could understand that as well too. Sometimes I often